Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Public Accounts. This morning, it's Tuesday, October 31st, 2017, and we are the Standing Committee on Public Accounts. We welcome you here this morning. I would also explain to all those in the audience, as well as I do to our committee, I do this generally, that because we're televised, these can become a real distraction, especially around the mics, so please either mute it or turn it off. And pursuant to Standing Order 1083, we are studying Report 5, Temporary Foreign Worker Program of the Spring 2017 reports of the Auditor General of Canada, part of the report that was referred to the committee on Tuesday, May 16th. We have as witnesses with us this morning from the Office of the Auditor General, Mr. Michael Ferguson, Auditor General of Canada, and Mr. Glenn Wheeler, Principal. Welcome. Also from the Department of Employment and Social Development, we have Ms. Louise Labonian, Deputy Minister. Thank you for being here. And Leslie McLean, Senior Associate Deputy Minister and Chief Operating Officer for Service Canada. As well, we have Mr. Paul Thompson, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Skills and Employment Branch. And after the first hour, there will be a couple switching out and other departmental heads coming in, and so that will suspend after the first hour and move into the second hour. Typical of this committee, we will hear our opening comments and then we will move into questions from the members of the committee. Welcome, Mr. Ferguson, and the time is now yours.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, thank you for this opportunity to present the results of our audit of the Temporary Foreign Worker Program, which is managed by Employment and Social Development Canada. The
Temporary Foreign Worker Program is meant to help employers fill job vacancies when qualified Canadians are not available. Employment and Social Development Canada is supposed to make sure that employers use the program to respond only to real labor shortages. Our audit focused on whether the department managed the program to allow employers to hire foreign workers on a temporary basis to fill labor shortages only when qualified Canadians were not available. The audit also focused on whether the department ensured that employers complied with program requirements. Moreover, we assessed how well the department implemented the reforms that the federal government announced in June 2014. Overall, the reforms introduced in 2014 contributed to a reduction in the number of temporary foreign workers. However, the department's implementation of these reforms did not ensure that employers hired temporary foreign workers only as a last resort.
In many cases, the department just took the word of employers that they couldn't find Canadian staff. The department also didn't consider sufficient labour market information to determine whether Canadians could fill jobs. We found cases in certain sectors, primarily caregivers and fish and seafood processing plants, in which the department should have better questioned whether temporary foreign workers were filling real labour shortages. In particular, there were indications that unemployed Canadians who last worked in a fish and seafood processing plant may have been available for work. In addition, the department committed to requiring employers to demonstrate that they had tried to fill low-wage positions by recruiting from underrepresented groups. In the files we reviewed to which this commitment applied, 65% of employers didn't make adequate efforts to appeal to underrepresented groups before requesting temporary foreign workers. Nevertheless, the department approved most of these applications. For example, program officers approved applications for temporary foreign workers in some fish and seafood processing plants located near First Nations communities, even when efforts to recruit from these communities were not found on file.
We also found that the department increased its enforcement activities since announcing program reforms. However, it did not use the information it had to focus its activities on employers of the most vulnerable workers or on employers that were most at risk of not complying with the program. As well, most enforcement activities consisted of reviewing documents that employers were asked to provide to investigators by mail. The department conducted few on-site inspections and face-to-face interviews with employers or temporary foreign workers.
The department didn't measure the results or impact of the program and didn't know what impact the program had on the labor market. Appropriate analysis of results and impacts could have helped the department understand underlying reasons why, for example, Canadians didn't appear willing to take some of the jobs that temporary foreign workers eventually filled. We're pleased to report that the department has agreed with our recommendations and has prepared an action plan to address them. Monsieur le Président, je termine ainsi.
Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening remarks. Would be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ferguson. We'll now move to Deputy Minister, Ms. Livonian.
Alors, merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and all members of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts for giving me the opportunity to share with you the progress we are making to fully address the recommendations made in the Auditor General's report on the Temporary Foreign Worker Program.
I just want to start off by saying that this program plays an important role in supporting a strong Canadian economy by helping employers fill labor market gaps while ensuring Canadians have first access to available jobs. This is a critically important balance to strive for, but in practice, it can be quite difficult to achieve. There are national, regional, and industry-specific considerations, and along with these considerations, the program must also ensure the protection of the rights of foreign workers. All this is not an easy task, and we are continually working to improve on achieving this right balance. Over the years, the program has evolved significantly to adapt to the realities of today's labor market. This includes placing a greater emphasis on ensuring Canadians and permanent residents have first access to jobs. For instance, following program changes in recent years, we have seen a 75% decline in approved positions for low-skilled workers, and this is between 2013 and 2016. Employers of high-wage workers are now required to develop plans for transitioning to a domestic workforce. And these changes have been part of the evolution of the program, and we're committed to continuing finding new ways to improve it. Mr. Chair, I want to assure you that these issues raised in the Auditor General's report are of the utmost importance to us. And we have accepted all of the recommendations made in the report, and the department has already taken action in a number of fronts. So let me just begin by articulating some of the actions that have already been taken. So on hiring Canadians first, let me begin by saying that we remain focused on ensuring Canadians are first in line for any available jobs. Employers must provide proof that they have been and continue to actively recruit Canadians. Employers must list every Canadian or permanent resident who applied for the job and literally justify why they are not hired. In response to the Auditor General's recommendations to strengthen the assessment of employers' recruitment efforts, new rules came into force on August 28th of this year. Employers in the low-wage stream must increase their recruitment efforts aimed at Indigenous people, vulnerable youth, persons with disabilities, and newcomers. These are the four groups most underrepresented in the labor force. We are increasing our use of available technology by requiring employers to use JobBank and its job matching service as one of their 3 advertising requirements. There are nearly 40,000 domestic job seekers using this service nationwide and is a valuable tool in connecting them with employers. The department is launching later this fall automatic enrollment of EI clients in JobBank's Job Alert service to connect even more Canadians with jobs. We're also working to increase the recruitment of Canadians in industries that are heavy users of the program and bolster domestic recruitment. Notre travail est bien avancé dans le
Our efforts are most advanced with the fish and seafood processing sector, where we are finalizing a collaborative action plan. This plan will identify resources and concrete actions for attracting, developing, and retaining a domestic workforce. On our assessment of employer applications, I'm pleased to report that we have launched a new quality assurance pilot program to monitor the assessment of employer applications. We will be launching the new quality assurance program across Canada in December.
The use of labor market information. Labor market information is really an important tool for the program. For example, we use current regional unemployment rates to focus on processing applications for certain low-wage occupations. In April of this year, the department increased its access to information on employer layoffs. Officers now have information from the last 12 months rather than 90 days, which was the case earlier, to check that employers are not laying off domestic workers and replacing them with foreign workers. The department is also working to incorporate new sources of data into its assessment for applications. This includes making better use of data from Statistics Canada's Job Vacancy and Wage Survey. We're also incorporating private sector forecasts on sectors and regional labor market conditions into our assessment. So on wages, the Auditor General also flagged concerns in his report that the program may be negatively impacting Canadian wages. The program requires employers to advertise jobs at the median wage or higher for that occupation. Employers must therefore pay temporary foreign workers the same amount that Canadians would expect to be paid for the same job. As such, the program should not be putting downward pressure on Canadian wages, but we will continue to monitor this as it is an important question. On compliance and enforcement, the program has continued to strengthen its regime to help protect its workers from abuse and exploitation. Since April 1st of this year, we've undertaken a number of initiatives to improve the compliance regime. To better target our resources and efforts, we've launched a new risk-based predictive model to help identify who to inspect, prioritizing the highest risk cases. Over 1,300 inspections launched this year have been identified using this model. The department has significantly also increased its on-site inspections, strategically focusing employers of the most vulnerable workers. So far this year, over 900 on-site inspections are either underway or have been completed. This is approximately 5 times more than last year. The investments we're making in on-site inspections are actually paying off. Of those completed this year, approximately 50% of employers needed to take some sort of corrective measure to be compliant. This is a 15% increase, more than were identified last year using primarily paper-based reviews, demonstrating that on-site inspections are an effective tool in identifying and correcting non-compliant behavior. Recognizing the important role that unannounced on-site visits could play in protecting foreign workers, we've accelerated our efforts and expect to complete work on this in the fall. ESDC understands the importance of partnerships as well and is working with the provinces and territories to improve enforcement through information sharing. We have updated agreements with Ontario and Alberta that are already in place, and we are revising existing agreements with British Columbia, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. We have also held consultations with provinces and territories on enhancing worker protections to better prevent abuse and exploitation of workers. Another issue I want to talk about a little bit is on performance measurement and results. The Auditor General raised concerns about the department's lack of evidence of the program's impact on the labor market. This is a complex question requiring intricate analysis and complicated by the significant changes made by the program in recent years. ESDC will actually undertake an evaluation in 2018 to examine the medium and long-term labor market impacts of the program. In the meantime, we have completed our program information profile that enables the collection of performance indicators, including information on program trends. Notably, the performance measurement strategy for the new Global Talent Stream will generate information on job creation and investment in skills and training by companies using this stream. Monsieur le Président, notre ministère travaille sur plusieurs.
Mr. Chair, our department is working on many fronts to continue improving the temporary foreign worker program. We've already made significant progress in addressing the recommendations made by the Auditor General. I've asked my Chief Audit Executive to undertake a follow-up on it in 2 years' time to confirm our progress. I am confident that we will fully address all of the recommendations in the report within the timeframes detailed in the Management Action Plan. Thank you for inviting us today. Your suggestions and comments are most welcome, and I'll be happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your testimony. We'll now move to Mr. Lefebvre. Mr. Lefebvre, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everyone, for being here this morning. The program is very important in my area, certainly Sudbury and Northern Ontario. This program is actually a job creator in the sense that if we wouldn't have these temporary foreign workers in Northern Ontario, because it's very hard to recruit people from the Southern Ontario or the rest of Canada that come to Northern Ontario, there are many, many challenges. So this is a very important program. So I was very interested in reading, obviously, the report, and I found it interesting. We were looking at saying, I know the time frame that we're looking at is from 2013 to 2016. And certainly the angle was more, how are we looking at this as to say, how can we reduce the abuse, certainly from employers, and ensuring they're doing their due diligence, the thorough due diligence to ensuring that they're properly advertising and probably trying to recruit across Canada before. At the same time, in my reality, in my office, it's more on the other side saying, how can we help employers find temporary foreign workers because they can't fill the jobs? So I was very interesting to see the difference in my reality and the approach from the Auditor General's report. That being said, I was very interested, certainly, in your comments, Mrs. Livonian, with respect to underrepresented groups. Certainly, that's something that has come up in the Auditor General's report, and that there was not, in the majority of the samples taken by the Auditor General's team, that they did not make adequate efforts to appeal to underrepresented groups. Certainly, the employers were not doing a properly job. And that between the dates of 2013 and 2016. And you've come to this committee this morning and told us that you are taking steps to require employers to do more to recruit in these underrepresented groups. So I'd like to hear more about what is your plan to address this situation.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I was reading the Auditor General's report here.
Perfect. So we are, the government is continuing to take steps, as I mentioned, to ensure that underrepresented groups are taken into consideration. As announced, also as part of the government's early actions in response to the HUMA report, low-wage employers are, as of August 28th, 2017, required to increase their targeted recruitment activities for underrepresented groups in the workforce. As I mentioned, Indigenous peoples, vulnerable youth, persons with disabilities, and newcomers. And specifically, they will be required to demonstrate that as of August 28th, they are required to demonstrate that they have made efforts to recruit from at least 2 underrepresented groups in the labor market to allow Canadians in these categories to have first access to available opportunities. Furthermore, all employers seeking access to the program through the high-wage and low-wage streams will be required to advertise on Job Bank and to use the job matching service, which connects registered job seekers with employers posting job vacancies on Job Bank.
So how will that be evaluated in the sense that if they're trying to, in the job banks, again, I'm thinking of Northern Ontario where it's not easy to recruit to start off with. So if they are in the job banks and they have another website or another effort, will that be sufficient to say, okay, well, and they've tried to recruit in these underrepresented groups? And because if the officer determines that they haven't done a proper job of trying to address that or try to recruit in those sectors, they can be refused. And that can be detrimental to these businesses if they don't have these workers come back, or any delays would actually be detrimental to the businesses, because from what I've heard from a lot of these employers is that without these temporary foreign workers, actually Canadians that they were actually employing would not have jobs. Well, I'm hearing that often. So what measures are you looking at to evaluate if they're actually doing that?
Thank you. So employers are required to advertise to 2 underrepresented groups. And then the officer looking at that file would then look to see how they've gone about doing that. Has there been appropriate outreach? And if there hasn't been appropriate outreach, what happens is their labor market information assessment is turned down. So we say that there hasn't been enough advertising done, there hasn't been enough outreach, and therefore you won't get a positive LMIA, which is necessary. The other thing that's required in assessing that is that employers are required to write down all the people, all Canadian and Canadians that have applied, and justify why they didn't hire them. So there is rigor involved in doing that. Now, the one thing that I would say, and I think a lot of the Auditor General's report kind of goes on that, just like with one's taxes, not every tax file is audited in the nth level of detail. There is some, I think, there are many applications, and there is risk-based audits, there is reviews of certain files, but there's a balance there too. To administer every single review of every single application in the nth level of detail would require significant resources. So there is a lot of risk-based assessment that's going on there to ensure that we're evaluating the program, we're making sure the program is addressing its requirements, but that it's done in a efficient, targeted way.
Okay. How much time do I have, Mr. All right. So, which brings me to your comment with respect to, in your opening statement, where you say, we are also working to increase the recruitment of Canadians in industries that are heavy users of the program and bolster domestic recruitment. Again, I bring that back to my reality, certainly in rural areas. And certainly if we are working to increase the recruitment of Canadians, when Canadians don't want to move to those areas, that is a constant challenge. So and again, so if we're looking at, because heavy users of the program, like I said before, they require this program in order to meet their needs, in order to hire actually other Canadians. So what do you mean by you're working to increase the recruitment of Canadians in industries that are heavy users of the program? Certainly, agriculture is one of the heavy users of the program because it's temporary. Thank you.
We'll leave 10 seconds for an answer here.
Okay. The one thing I'll say really quickly is that we're undertaking sectoral reviews to see those heavy users, what we can do, working with partners, the industry, working with labor groups to see what can be done to actually make that situation better for.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lefebvre. We'll welcome Ms. Rempel to our committee this morning. Welcome here, and you have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Ferguson, it's my understanding that in your report you identified that there were companies who were simultaneously laying off workers but also hiring temporary foreign workers. Is that correct?
What we did was we looked at EI information, and we found a number of people had been laid off from fish plants and were collecting the EI at the same time as fish plants were hiring temporary foreign workers. So that gave an indication that perhaps there were people with the experience to work in the fish plants that would have been available in the market because they were collecting EI at that time.
Would you consider this a clear abuse of the program?
We didn't identify it as an abuse of the program. Again, there may be many different reasons why a Canadian worker decides not to take a job if a job is available. What we identified it as was an indication that the department should be looking into these to try to find out how can there be Canadian workers who have experience in a particular industry, are collecting employment insurance at the same time as the employers are hiring temporary foreign workers. So, really it was, we couldn't get any further down than just the indication, and that's what the role of the department is to get further down into
Ms.
that.
Livonian, on that point, has there been any analysis done as to why this situation took place?
Sure. I mean, I can answer that at a reasonably high level, and if we need to get into detail, we can. So employers seeking to hire TFWs.
I'm just in terms, just for time, has an analysis on that particular situation, as Mr. Ferguson laid out, in terms of why people on EI are not being given jobs in this particular industry, has an analysis within the department been completed?
So yes, we look into.
Could you please table that information with committee, just for time?
Sure.
The results of that analysis?
We can provide information on that for sure.
Thank you. From that analysis, was there any indication that perhaps this was an issue of unfair compensation or lower compensation or unsafe working conditions, rather than perhaps a need for temporary foreign workers, as to why Canadian workers weren't taking the jobs?
So, what has to happen, generally speaking, in those circumstances is that the first step is that employers have to advertise to Canadian workers.
Okay.
And there's a rigorous...
So that's not what I'm asking. In your departmental analysis, was there any indication that the reason why Canadian workers weren't taking jobs was because of lower wages, or wages that weren't deemed to be high enough to do the type of work that was indicated?
So to the extent, this is a very tricky thing to analyze because you're looking at all kinds of reasons and the data, et cetera. But to the extent that we have been able to dig down into these issues, there does not seem to be a wage issue. The wage is supposed to be advertised at the median wage for Canadians, and so the same wage is being paid. So a Canadian would, what's being offered to the temporary foreign worker is the same that's being offered to the Canadian.
Okay, that's answer enough for my question. You mentioned that you've put in place an action plan and a quality assurance framework. Can you table with the committee the costs associated with both building out that framework and implementing it?
So all of that work is being done within the existing resources of the department.
Okay, were there any full-time employees that were either taken off of regular duties to implement the framework or put the framework together?
Taken off of other duties?
Yes, yeah. I'm just looking at, and you also mentioned that the cost of implementing a higher degree of rigor around, rather than looking at just, to my colleague's question, spot testing, it would actually look at this in a lot more detail would require more resources. Is that
Yes.
correct? Do you have an analysis on how much that would cost?
So just on the quality assurance, there is people who do that on a continuous basis. We have done it more formally and more specifically based on the Auditor General's recommendations. And on that front, I would say no. On the increased inspections, et cetera, I believe, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, that we actually received additional funding to undertake that.
And how much was that?
Do you remember what the exact amount?
There's been funding changes with the policy changes that have been introduced over the years.
Would you be able to table that with committee as well?
That's all available in public
Thank you.
accounts.
I guess where I'm trying to go with this is that we've spent a lot of resources changing a program that I find, even in its naming, pejorative. And frankly, I think that probably depresses wages and prevents, and first of all, I find it frankly abusive to the people who come to this country with no path to citizenship through these programs. And I also think that they're subject to abuse, but this is also subject, the program itself is subject to abuse. Mr. Ferguson, what was the time frame for your audit?
I'll just double check to make sure I have it right. It was 1st of January 2013 to the 31st of August 2016.
So that ostensibly that data would have been within the department, like just in terms of high level of usage and whatnot. Not your findings, but the data that you were examining, the department would have had access to prior to the Liberal government announcing in March 2016 that they were lifting some restrictions on the temporary foreign worker program in Atlantic Canada. Is that correct?
Well, all the data that we use primarily came from the department. It was the department's data.
Fantastic. So I'll note that in the news release around the lifting of the restrictions on the temporary foreign worker program, specifically around seafood processing plants, one of the arguments that were made was that essentially the companies were saying that they couldn't find Canadian workers to do the jobs. Yet you have said in your report specifically that it was some of the seafood processing plants that were found, like these were the cases that you actually found where the employers were saying that they had done everything possible to find Canadian workers, but yet the department was just taking their word for it. Is that correct?
Well, there were a number of different issues that were raised in the seafood processing area. I think in paragraph 37, for example, we say that the seafood processing plants told the departments that temporary foreign workers were required because some Canadians had quit their positions and because of the conditions or difficulty of the work. So, and also, later on, we say that some of the seafood processing plants said that they had to lay off Canadians in order to actually prevent them from going to work to other seafood processing plants. So, at a certain point in time, they wanted to be laid off. So it was particularly, I guess, complex related to the seafood processing plants, and it seemed to be, related to not just the temporary foreign worker program, but also to the EI program, and I think that's something that the department needs to consider as well.
Thank you
very much, Mr. Ferguson. We'll now move to Mr. Christopherson. Mr. Christopherson, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you all for your attendance today. I have to say, it's not a very impressive audit. It's not as if we found detailed problems and we need to work at that. The whole overall program does not seem to have been given the kind of thought that normally programs of this importance have been given. Just by way of some opening thoughts, the Auditor General's opening remarks in paragraph 4, where he talked about the department's talked about the reforms in 14, and the Auditor General says, however, the department's implementation of these reforms did not ensure that employers hired temporary foreign workers only as a last resort. And yet, it seems to me that's the whole raison d'etre of the program. So I have real problems as to how serious this was structured and managed and carried out. And I have particular concern about the management culture that would allow what we find in this audit to take place. Like, this is very disturbing. For instance, on page 18 of the Auditor General's report, 5.93, performance measurement strategy. We found, quote, we found that the department did not have a performance measurement strategy for the program, so it could not measure or adequately report on the results of the program. I mean, look, I don't have a lot of personal education, but I've been doing this business a long time, and one of the key things I've learned is you have to be able to measure your performance. I mean, that's a basic, fundamental starting point. How, Deputy, could you get it wrong from the get-go, that you didn't even have in place the ability to measure how well your performance was? How could that be?
Ms. Livonian.
Thank you. So we do have performance measures in place that are actually reported publicly. I can get into the details of what those are, but
So the Auditor General's wrong?
we do have performance
The auditor,
measures in
well, I'm
place.
sorry, well, the rest of the question, I read the exact quote, and you're suggesting that's not correct, so something's not right here. So, Mr. Ferguson, somebody help me understand, we've got two different points of view.
Mr.
Come on,
Ferguson,
time's going.
I
Let's
see
go.
that the light is on there.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
but-
sorry. I'll ask Mr. Wheeler
Wheeler.
to address the finding then.
Mr. Chair, what we found in the audit report is that although there was a requirement for a performance measurement strategy to be in place, there was not one, and such a strategy would indicate indicators about how to measure the success of the program and the data that would be used to populate those indicators. The Deputy Minister is making reference to some data that appears in the DPR, which in and of itself doesn't provide enough information to indicate whether the program is successful or not. An example of that would be, and we don't refer to it specifically in the report, but as public information, is the amount of time it takes to publish or to do an LMIA for a high-skilled request for a worker.
Deputy?
So what I would say is, so there has been information available. We're always improving that information, and so certain information was available, and Paul can talk about that if you wish. But as of January 2017, there has been a more comprehensive performance measurement plan put in place.
So even though you maintain you had one, it wasn't good enough. Let's move along. I have a bit of a problem on reconciling the report and what the deputy has said here today vis-a-vis the risk and benefit. The department answered, back up, the Auditor General criticized the fact that there weren't any, or there were certainly insufficient on-site inspections. And any that were happening were not surprise visits. They were told ahead of time that you were coming. And in your response, the department's response, the Auditor General on page 17, it says the department has also increased the number of on-site inspections that it conducts at employers' premise to enhance the protection of vulnerable temporary foreign workers. Finally, the department will undertake an assessment of the risks and benefits by April 2018 of conducting unannounced on-site inspections. And yet today, in your remarks, Deputy, you said, recognizing the important role that unannounced on-site visits could play in protecting foreign workers, we have accelerated our efforts and expect to complete the work this fall. How could we be so far away that in your written response to the Auditor General, it was going to take until next April for you to decide whether or not, based on a risk and benefit assessment, on-site inspections would be a good idea, and then roll in and say, recognizing the important role? Come on, there's a disconnect there. Help me.
Ms. Livonian.
Thank you, Chair. So there's no question that on-site inspections are something that's recognized as being beneficial.
Well, let's stop right there. You say
On-site.
but that's not what you said in the. You just said now, because I agree with you. It's obvious on-site inspections make sense. But in your written response, you said it was going to take till April of next year to do a risk and benefit assessment to decide whether or not conducting unannounced site inspections would be a good idea or not. Come on, we've got a bit of a revisionist history going on here.
Ms. Livonian.
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to answer that question. So I was just going to do it in stages, but I'll leap to the question that you're asking. Unannounced on-site inspections are not something the department has done in the past, and it is something we want to tread in carefully. We don't want to put employees at risk, because those kind of inspections can result in that. We need to consult with the unions. We need to establish the proper procedures in doing that. So there are steps
Nobody
that
suggested you shouldn't.
Right. So that takes a bit of time.
You know, I got to tell you, I haven't yet heard one utterance, Deputy, saying, we screwed up, we failed, we didn't do the job. You're being very defensive, and that always annoys me when there isn't some recognition. This is a bad audit, Deputy. This is a bad audit. This does not look good on you or the department. And so far, all I'm hearing is defenses about how well you're doing. I'd like to start hearing some recognition how badly you failed, and how you're going to pick up your socks.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Christopherson. We'll have to wait. We'll keep everyone in suspense for that. It'll be coming a little later. We'll now move to Mr. Massé. Monsieur Massé, you have 7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to thank you for being with us today. We really appreciate it. I know there's a lot of work involved and with your teams in preparing to come and answer our questions. So I would like to echo what my colleague, Mr. Lefebvre, said about the importance of this program for regions such as mine in the east of Quebec and Gaspésie. The economic situation in Canada has improved notably. I'll stay objective. So kind of 430,000 jobs that have been created in recent months, and it has been an impact on the employment rate, and it has dropped in some regions significantly. In Quebec City, the employment rate is still around 4%, and I know this rate has gone down as well. So the impact that this has been positive for Canadian jobs. It also has an impact on employers. For example, in the summer, I was in my riding, and I went around to visit various employers, and they told me that they had a lack of labor. So we have to be able to meet their needs in the regions. I'm thinking about restaurant owners who had to close their restaurants. For example, sometimes at lunch, in some cases, they weren't able to open. So they told me that they used qualified labor, and they wanted to have access to this. So I look at the statistics from 2009, and we see that there's a decrease in the number of temporary foreign workers between 2009 and 2015, and the decrease was 32%. So there is some correlation here. My first question is general. Is this a decrease in the number of jobs for foreign temporary workers? Is this continuing in 2016, this decrease? I think that it's more or less stabilized. I don't know if you have the precise figures. It's stabilized for many aspects of the programs, but there's an increase in the agricultural sector where there are needs that are ongoing. Perfect. Thank you. If you have any updated information, I'd like to have it. Yes, I would like to obtain them, please. Thank you. Mr. Ferguson, you said in your brief in recommendation 5.44 that the department should have a quality framework for the TFWP, and that they should be able to ensure that program officers make decisions that with regard to processing requests. Here's a more generic question. How does the situation described refer to other similar programs? It's an important aspect for several programs to have a quality assurance program with regard to decisions. It's one way that we can ensure that the programs meets the requirements. So it's a normal aspect of any program. Ms. Livonian, in the same context, perhaps it also echoes what my colleague, Mr. Christopherson was saying, rather. Why don't you have a national quality assurance program to make sure the decisions made are coherent? Inaudible for the interpreter. Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the Auditor General said, we had improvement within our program management. And there's one factor that was very important, that to make sure there was consistency and coherency with regard to every agent making decisions. As you mentioned, we need to have a quality assurance framework. And the pilot project that we conducted since spring show us that it helps our program officers to make coherent decisions. It's what we call make sure it's a real job offer. And we also have to make sure that the conditions will be similar to those offered to a Canadian for a similar job. Thank you. I'd like to know a bit more about the pilot project that you're conducting. Tell me a bit more about them. What have you done, and what were the objectives of the pilot project? There are several factors that a program officer has to evaluate when they make a decision. And unfortunately, I'll have to move back to English to answer this question.
Labor market factors. So genuineness, for example, would be, is the offer coming from an employer that legally exists and operates a business related to the job offer being made? So is there a real job? Labor market, will it have a positive, neutral, or negative impact on the labor market? Donc, le pilote.
The pilot project was to have a framework to make sure that the decisions that evaluate these factors are taken on a constant matter from one coast of the country to the other. And that our teamwork, the work that our team did, rather, shows that the framework, as announced, is working well and will continue implementing it with regard to quality assurance. In the response that you provided to the Auditor General's recommendations, you underscored the fact that in autumn of 2016, a national framework was implemented. So are you saying that this implementation has already started, or that it will be started in coming weeks and months? It will be started in coming weeks. Our objective right now is to have it in place for all program officers making decisions in December, so in a few weeks. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Massé. Mr. Deltel, you have 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ladies and generals, welcome to the House of Commons. I can tell you that this subject makes me quite uncomfortable as a Canadian. We have a low unemployment rate, and if I go back to what Mr. Massé was saying in Quebec, it's more a job problem than a labor problem. There are people who are looking for a job, and we have to rely on foreign workers to fill these positions. It is difficult. As a Canadian, I'm not very proud of this reality. I think that Canadians should be able to work as much as possible and to contribute to economic growth and prosperity in our country. And when I see people from outside the country coming, I welcome them, but there are people in Canada who are unemployed. So it's somewhat an uncomfortable situation. As Ms. Rempel mentioned earlier, the analysis you conducted in the seafood processing sector in the Atlantic regions leads us to understand that there were people who were available looking for a job but did not have one. In some cases, these people even left their job and were replaced by TFWs. It's always difficult when you use this expression. As a son of an immigrant, I don't like to talk about foreigners. I like to talk about people who are becoming Canadians. But it's the example, perhaps the most uncomfortable example that we can show. If there are people who are available to work in a town, they could do the work, but they're no longer doing it, and then people from outside come in. How can we find the situation normal? The program does have requirements that are in place, and everyone has to meet them. I mentioned that there are, for example, notices that are provided to Canadians first. So there has to be a positive LMI. They also, if there are Canadians that do apply for the program, if we don't hire these Canadians, there must be valid reasons. They must explain why they didn't hire Canadians. So there are requirements for the program in place to make sure that the situation that you described doesn't happen. But it's not perfect. It doesn't always happen like that. And there are cases where employers do things they shouldn't. And it's up to us to examine these situations and try to find them out. And sometimes these situations do happen, but we are having dialogue with these some employers. I'm not sure how you say this in French. Yes, the seafood processors. So we're trying to establish an action plan with these employers. Together, we'll be able to make sure that this situation doesn't happen again. And we're trying to adjust the plan. But how are you doing this? We learned recently in an article from CBC that the government lightened up the rules, and it allowed a seafood company hire even more foreign workers. And we know that in this region, it's the highest level of employment in the country. So does that mean that the discussions you've had with these employers, it's to lighten up the restrictions or to make them more rigorous, to allow Canadians who are in Canada, who live in Canada, who pay taxes in Canada, to work? That's a good question. It's kind of a balance we were talking about before. There are employers who do not have access to Canadian employers and who are going to have to close their plants if they do not hire temporary foreign workers out. And it's not good for Canada either. In some cases, for example, in remote farms, we can understand this. But here we're talking about the seafood industry. It's always been in place. And people have been working there for generations. During my summer vacation, I went to PEI. So I saw this. And so how can we lighten these restrictions when this is where the unemployment rates are the highest? Ms. Livonian? It's the explanation I gave you previously. It's always difficult to know the details about a specific plant. If there was really a requirement to have foreign workers or not. This is what we do when we evaluate the sector. We try to avoid situations like this one. Thank you.
Move to Mr. Area, please. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Livonian, you mentioned that there has been a 75% decline in approved positions between 2013 and 2016. And we do see here from Exhibit 5.1, to take the example of caregivers, there's a dramatic decrease from 12,695 positions in 2014 to just 3,968 positions. While on paper it appears good, does it mean the demand has gone down? Does it mean that the Canadians have started working as caregivers?
So there were all kinds of reform. Oh, sorry. Was that? Okay. Keep doing. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there have been a number of reforms that have taken place over the last number of years that have resulted in a reduction in those numbers. And one of the key factors, I would say, is the increase in fees. The fees were increased from $275 to $1,000 for each position that an employer wants to.
So, you mean to suggest that one of the major factors is just the increase of fees? This is a dramatic decrease from close to 13,000 to less than 4,000. Is it because you stopped approving these positions?
And there are many factors I can go through. We've strengthened advertising requirements. We've introduced a cap on the number of TFWs. We've limited the length of time a TFW could stay working to 1 year. There are transition plans required. Their fees were increased. So there are many factors that go into that.
Then you said that you are increasing unannounced on-site inspection, which appears to be good on paper, but for small businesses, that may put additional stress. Small businesses are already under heavy regulations. For them, managing the business going unannounced on site may create some problems.
Absolutely, and so that's exactly why we haven't done unannounced on-site inspections yet. It's the analysis that we're doing before implementing something like that would take into consideration those kind of. We want to make sure our employees are protected. We want to make sure that the procedures are properly in place. We want to collaborate with provinces.
I'm happy to hear that, because a small business like a restaurant where husband, wife, owners, they work along with the temporary foreign worker, they'll all be working, say, busy lunchtime, and you drop in on on-site inspection. You can imagine the impact that will have. Yes. Okay, coming back to this program has been around for quite long time. I'll come to your remarks. You says that the program plays an important role in supporting strong Canadian economy by helping employers fill labor market jobs while ensuring Canadians have first access to available jobs. But next you also say that this is a critically important balance to strive for, but in practice can be quite difficult to achieve. But this program has been around for a long time. Even now, if you say that this is a very difficult balance to achieve, there are national, regional, industry-specific considerations. These have been there for a long time. Why have we not found a solution yet?
I wish I could say that it's an easy thing to solve, but some things are difficult. There are always demands, as you've just heard from the conversation that's taking place here today. There's always, on one hand, those employers who are saying, I truly cannot find employees and I need them to continue my job, to continue economic growth. And on the other side, there are Canadians that are saying, why is it that I'm not being...
Okay, I understand. My time is quite limited. I have one last question. You did mention that the Auditor General flagged concern the program may be negatively impacting Canadian wages, and you said that the program should not be putting downward pressure on Canadian wages. Once again, this program has been around for a long time. If the AG suggests that there may be negative impact on Canadian wages, you're saying it should not be putting. How do we know who is correct here?
Sure. So, I can answer that. To a certain extent, the program has evolved significantly. It is constantly, because of all these pressures, constantly evolving. So as it evolves, it has different impacts on the labor market and on wages. The primary thing that we keep in mind is that when an offer is made, that it has to be made at the median or above, and therefore we would not expect there to be implications. However, that's not to say that there aren't many factors that are at play here, and we want to continuously analyze.
Have you tried?
No, Mr. Thank you. Ms. Rempel, please. You have 5 minutes.
I'll try and continue the line of questions that I had before. Going back to the March 2016 announcement on lifting the exemption or the restrictions on TFWs for seafood processing plants, one of the rationales for this laid out by my Liberal colleagues was by my colleague Sean Fraser, and he said, North Nova is a perfect example. These guys bent over backwards trying to fill jobs. Just wondering if you can table with committee any data that was provided to the Liberal government to back up that particular claim in justifying the lifting of the restriction on the temporary foreign worker program for seafood companies, especially in light of the findings that Mr. Ferguson has laid out in this report. So that will be done? Yes. Thank you. I'm also just wondering if there has been any efforts made by your department, especially given the high level of humanitarian immigration that we've seen this year and the high levels of unemployment in humanitarian immigration this year, to match people who are coming to Canada through those streams with jobs that may be being filled by temporary foreign workers right now. Are there any programs specifically designed to do that?
Specifically, designed to protect?
Match unemployed people who have come in through humanitarian immigration streams over the last 2 years who are currently unemployed with positions that are being filled by temporary foreign workers? Go ahead.
So there are a number of actions in place with the fish and seafood sector and other high users of the program to tap into those very groups.
How many positions have been filled through that?
One
initiative?
example, we did a project in Prince Edward Island with youth. I believe there were 50 youth that were brought in through summer work experience, which filled jobs. There's outreach to one of our service providers for Indigenous programming in New Brunswick,
So
and there's
specifically
efforts
what I've
to.
asked is for people who have come in through the humanitarian immigration stream in the last 2 years, how many of those people have through programs in your department been linked with jobs that are currently being filled by temporary foreign workers?
Right, I was speaking to your previous question. On the current, there is outreach. I don't have data on the on asylum seekers or Syrian refugees.
Would you be able to
on it.
provide that? Are you tracking that?
There's work being done in conjunction with Immigration, Refugee, and Citizenship to work on Syrian refugees, for example, in the settlement. So that's a shared responsibility with IRCC.
So what I'm looking for specifically is how many, through any efforts that your department has, people who have come in through humanitarian immigration streams, including asylum seeking or PSR or GSR programming, have been matched with jobs that are currently filled by TFWs. Can you provide that to the committee?
We will look into providing it, certainly an action plan to do it. I don't know if there's data available yet on the results of those types of
Okay,
efforts.
and data or the actual outline of that action plan would be useful as well, too, as well as any associated funding that's been allocated for that. Just again, going back to the exemption or the restrictions that were lifted in March 2016. How many more temporary foreign workers? What's been the year-over-year increase in temporary foreign workers utilized under that particular exemption?
Mr. Chair, point of order. Just in terms of clarification, I'm a new member to this committee. So are we supposed to be focusing on the audit per se? I know that Mrs. Rempel wanted to touch on perhaps the after, the action that has been taken after. So I'm just curious as to...
Yeah, I think her questioning is still on subject of the temporary foreign worker program. Her question specifically was a certain stream of people coming in on the humanitarian. Are there temporary foreign workers that are hired? So I think it's still in line here. Ms. Rempel, you still have a minute and a half.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, related to the Auditor General's finding around abuse of the program, and specifically since the Auditor General did focus on abuses within the seafood processing industry, I'm wondering if you can provide to committee the number year over year since the lifting of the exemption on the temporary foreign worker restrictions in TFW usage in that industry.
Those data are completely available by industry sector and by province, so there's no problem providing that. We currently have about just under 1,400 temporary foreign workers in the seafood processing industry in 2016.
Okay, and so since the restrictions have been lifted, can you provide us with a year-over-year analysis? Thank you. I'm also just wondering if you could provide us with sort of the amount of resources, a comparison of the amount of resources that are expended on managing the TFW program writ large, as it relates to the amount of resources that are spent with matching perhaps people who have come in through humanitarian streams with jobs.
Thank you. Ms. Livonian?
Definitely on how much is expended on the temporary foreign worker program. We have that data. I'm not sure about the second part, but we'll look into it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Looks like you're going to have some homework to do there, and thank you for that. I tell the committee as well that if there's a question that, because I think two of you are going to have to leave fairly soon, my understanding is, if there's a question that you feel wasn't answered properly or you have extra information, please just include that back to the committee because we will be doing a report on it. So thank you for that. I think we're going to suspend for just a moment and allow our deputy and Ms. McLean to leave and to bring two others in from the department to take their place. So we'll suspend momentarily. We're pleased to call the meeting back to order, and our Deputy Minister had to take an exit. She was here. We're very pleased that she was able to be here for the first hour and 15 minutes. But we welcome Elise Boisjoli and Ms. Hebert. No.
She's in U1.
Okay, she came in, and Mr. Thompson stayed, as well as our Auditor General. So we're just going to continue. There was no other. We'll continue with Mr. Chen. We're still on the second round, Mr. Chen, so you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and welcome to the new witnesses that have joined us for the meeting. So I'm looking at this audit, and I'm focusing on the purpose. The purpose is to determine whether or not the temporary foreign worker program was properly managed. And to me, that is the key question here. It's a program that is intended, as we all know, to allow Canadian employers to hire temporary foreign workers for labor shortages, and I would gather that this would be used as a last resort for these employers. To me, it's very clear that the Auditor General is saying in his report, in his conclusion, that management of this program was not complete. So I look on this page, and I just have certain things that are jumping out at me that are clearly very troubling. So on page 19, paragraph 5.97, it says, the department did not conduct analysis of the labor market to determine whether there was a real labor shortage of caregivers. And to me, that's a fundamental question, because the whole point of the program is to fill labor shortages. And if we are bringing in as a country temporary foreign workers for providing care, we don't know. How can we not know? How can we not know and analyze the information that we have? Clearly, the federal government has a lot of data. How are we not asking ourselves that simple, fundamental question as to whether there's, quote, a real labor shortage? Can I have a response from the department?
Thank you. So as with all occupations, we do carefully monitor trends in the use of the program by all the different streams and all the different occupations, including caregivers. As was noted earlier by one of your colleagues, we've seen a fairly significant reduction in the number of caregivers coming in through the program. So there's been diminished use of that provision. We're heavily reliant on recruitment efforts to demonstrate the shortage, that the employer went to the requisite efforts to find a Canadian, and if they weren't able to, that is often the trigger, but we supplement that with the use of labor market information. That supplementing with labor market information is an ongoing challenge, and we're trying to do more and more of that in the future, and that was one of the weaknesses pointed out by the Auditor General that we're working on further improving. On overall impact on the labor market, that's a pretty complex question that's best suited for an evaluation, and as our deputy noted, we have an evaluation plan that'll do the economic analysis of what is the resulting impact of the program on the labor market. That can't be done on a month-by-month basis.
A few paragraphs up, 5.95, it says the department found that almost 2,000 temporary foreign workers had claimed EI in the 2013 to 14 fiscal year, most of whom were laid off because of a shortage of work. So my friend across the way, Ms. Rempel, mentioned that there are Canadians that are being laid off in certain industries and are unable to find work. And at the same time, this finding indicates that there are also temporary foreign workers who are claiming EI because they too are facing a shortage of work. And we're all working within a program that is supposed to bring in workers to address temporary shortages of work. So do we have any more information other than what is presented here? Do we know more about the 2,000 temporary foreign workers who claimed EI? What were their situations? Are there any specific industries that this is more prevalent in than others? Can we have more information about that?
So temporary foreign workers are fully eligible for employment insurance. They pay premiums. They have all the rights of a Canadian or permanent resident who is working. They too face interruptions in work, unanticipated interruptions with a downturn in the business or an event perhaps that disrupts the work. Perhaps an employer has an application for a temporary foreign worker and the situation dramatically changes when the temporary foreign worker arises. These are provisions that are in place to support TFWs just as we would support other Canadians who are in the program. So the EI program does come into play with temporary foreign workers in that regard, and we continue to track those issues. There are a number of industry sectors where that would be the case. It's not unique to one industry sector.
The department representative that was here earlier mentioned that we have certain.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chen. Good try, though. Mr. Christofferson.
Thank you, Chair. First off, just to underscore, we've made a big point of making sure that deputies are here since they're the legal accounting officers, and I know that the deputy had to leave. There was original 1 hour. I just wanted to underscore, it's my understanding that deputy was really concerned about leaving for that 35 minutes in light of the importance of the deputy being here. Of course, it was originally scheduled for an hour, so we understand, but I just want to underscore, because I'm one of the ones that scream the loudest when they don't show up, but I also want to be one of the ones that compliment them and thank them for recognizing the importance of being here, and that was reflected. So I wanted to give the deputy something positive to go home with.
May I also just add that she made it very clear that she was disappointed, but that if there was anything that she had to come back for, she was more than willing to come back.
Well, she's lucky we won't measure her disappointment, but human nature. I'd be glad to get out of here. I want to turn to 5.37 on page 7. And to me, this underscores a lot of the concerns. And by the way, I know I don't have a lot of time, but I appreciated Mr. Lefebvre opening up with the concerns in his area, pointing out to the other side. And my own colleagues, given some of the areas they represent, it's the same thing. It is a complex issue. But the concern, the broader concern, I think is very much captured in 5.37, Chair. And if I may, it's very brief. It says, in addition, some employers of fish and seafood processing plants, where we've had particular problems, told the department that temporary foreign workers were required because some Canadians had quit their positions because of the conditions or difficulty of the work. In our opinion, the Auditor General, this type of situation appeared to be a retention problem, not a labor shortage problem, meaning that the working conditions are so poor, the pay is so poor that you can't keep workers. That's very different than I have a selected need for a certain niche talent and I don't have it here. And also, back over to 5.18 on page 4, again, the Auditor General, and this is the link, and then I'm coming to our guests. This finding matters because the number of temporary foreign workers kept increasing over the years as some employers were building their business models on the program. So we can see a connection between the two, and my question, or my question would be to the Mr. Thompson. talk to us about how you view this issue of whether or not it's a retention problem, a labor shortage. Do you agree with the Auditor General that some of those conditions where your department has said, yeah, we recognize you have a need, that's actually a retention problem and therefore a misuse of the program? Your thoughts, please.
So there's a few points there. I would say overall the use of the temporary foreign worker by the seafood industry has diminished over the years. There were about 1,800 temporary foreign workers in 2012, and that number has dropped significantly. It's not a wage issue in our view, at least as far as we can see. We have rules that require them to pay at the prevailing wage for fish processors or above. So there are very solid wage rules that are enforced quite rigorously on what workers are paid. I can't claim that working in a fish plant is an attractive job offer. That's something that employers work on. We have worked closely with the industry on recruitment plans, so they definitely have challenges on the HR front, and we're supporting them in working with provinces and territories to help recruitment. I mentioned a couple of examples of working with young people, working with Indigenous groups, working with the provinces for social assistance recipients and other unemployed people in the province. These are all efforts that the federal and provincial governments are doing to help with the recruitment, and certainly the industry I know is seized with retention as well.
Okay. Quickly, if I can, you're now doing some on-site inspections. Of the ones that were completed, you're bragging that 50% needed to take some sort of corrective measure. I'm looking at that as half of them aren't compliant. So how is that a success story? That half of them. So how did it get to the point that they're that far into the program and 50% aren't compliant? How is that?
Mr. Thompson.
So I can start, and my colleague Elise can elaborate. There's differences in the degree of. There could be a minor non-compliance issue that's corrected, or there could be a more significant contravention of the rules, which would lead to penalties and fines. And we have significant measures in place in our framework that can lead to fines up to $1 million and a lifetime ban from the program. So there are significant penalties in place for serious abuses. When it's a minor contravention, Elise can explain, but we take issues to make sure it's completely compliant with the rules of the program.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So when we're looking, as my colleague pointed out, there's various degree in terms of non-compliance. So when there's non-compliance, let's say around wages, we strongly work and encourage the employer to correct it and make sure that the temporary foreign workers is paid the amount of money that he should be paid, or the working conditions such as vacation pay or overtime is being paid to the temporary foreign worker. And when the situation is corrected, we're saying that they've been compliant with compensation, so they've compensated the worker. It allows the company or the employer to keep their job filled with people that they need to continue to grow their business. It allows the temporary foreign worker to continue to have a job and be able to support himself. So it's not a good news story. Now, it's not bragging about it, but it's really trying to maintain the integrity of the program while maintaining the opportunity for the temporary foreign workers to work there and for the business to grow. When we have a case of serious abuse, we would refer them to enforcement authorities. We would make sure that we remove the worker from an employment of abuse and work with RRCC to find potentially an open permit or find some other jobs for the temporary foreign worker.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
But on, just very quickly, when there is a case of abuse, is that person then, that employer, there's red flags there? How does that work with temporary foreign workers, the program later, if the same one? Is there a red flag with that employer?
When there's serious abuse, absolutely, an employer cannot hire another temporary foreign workers. Quite often, we would refer to enforcement agency. There could be criminal charges that would be laid against that employer, and from there, we would ensure that that employer is banned from the program. When there's an RCMP investigation, obviously we rely on the RCMP to do the investigation. We would kind of follow up with our own inspection, but we make sure that that's the employer.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Ms. Mendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before going on with my own questions, I wanted to check something. I think that the Deputy Minister said earlier, and I just want to check this. I think she said earlier that on-site inspections hadn't yet started and you weren't sure how to do them yet. When you do on-site inspections, how can you say that 50% of them weren't compliant? Something doesn't seem to be right. I just wanted to check that. I want to talk about the elephant in the room. Namely, for example, I'm someone who's worked for a long time in the pay sector. I'd like to talk about Canadians who don't want to do some jobs. I think one of the reasons why this program started in '66 is because of this problem. Many Canadians refuse to do some jobs. It's their right. And employers who run a farm, etc., found themselves with labor shortages, important ones. And they ended up finding a solution by establishing this program for temporary foreign workers. If we examine this program without admitting this phenomena, it's quite unjust with regard to people who are hired, but also with regard to the employers who have to hire people to fill these positions. There have been many changes over the years, and since for the past 15, 20 years, we've had a lot of different family workers. We've had caregivers found throughout Canada. And I find it extremely worrisome to see a difference between 2009 for caregivers, and now we're down to a level of 3,000 or 4,000 today. So how can you explain this notable decrease in a job category that we know very well? Everyone in our ridings hasn't seen a decline in demand. We're still looking for caregivers. So how do we cut so deeply into this program, and how are we going to make up for this? Because I'm certain there aren't a lot of Canadians who want to do these jobs. Thank you. I don't have a fulsome answer, but the department does receive applications for the program. And we have noted a decline, as you mentioned, in this job category of the program. At the same time, there were changes in the immigration policy for caregivers. And these changes had an impact on the volume. And the Deputy Minister mentioned that we had an increase in fees that went from $175,000 per occupation. And the government announced a reduction in these fees. And we are implementing a reduction for fees for families, for middle-income families. If the fees are also one of the factors that can have an impact.
Still there. There's still a huge demand on caregivers. The increase in fees was probably one of the biggest reasons why you saw this dramatic drop in the applications, because it hasn't disappeared. Even in bad economic times, the request for caregivers has been constant, and it's something that I've personally witnessed in a very direct manner through my office. So I don't think the question there is really because the demand has diminished, but because the fees had increased so very much. So okay, you've taken some steps, or IRCC is taking steps to diminish the fees, or it's our
fee. It's your fee. Yes, we charge the $1,000 fee per
on top of
per
the
worker.
Application fees for immigration.
Immigration has its own fees for immigration. For the TFW program, we have a $1,000 per position fee, which I said is going to be waived in the future for middle and low income family caregivers.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. So we'll now move back to Mr. Deltel, and we're continuing on 5-minute rounds, so we're aware of that. Vous avez 5 minutes.
Merci,
So you have 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you. I applaud you for your French. Welcome to our committee today.
To get back to square one. Every government would like to see every Canadian working, giving job to every Canadian, and every Canadian working hard, proud to wake up in every morning, Friday evening enjoying that with family, and being proud to work hard. That's the target. But if we can't, well, there is time for open the door to foreign temporary worker. I welcome the fact that Madame Mendez raised the issue a few minutes ago about the elephant in the room. Madame Mendez is right, absolutely right. That's the sad reality of Canada, and this is why I said in my earlier statement that I'm not very proud of that, but that's the reality. So what do we do to address that? I don't think the best way is to feed the famous elephant, but instead be sure that every Canadian could have a job and could work. So, je vais revenir à la recommandation.
Go back to recommendation 541. Here it says that this program exists because it should be a last resort for the employer. But the recommendation 5.41 says that the exactitude of employer declarations who use the program weren't necessarily closely followed. I want to know what measures have been taken to make sure that when employers look for TFWs, they do it because it's really a last resort, rather than, as we mentioned earlier, in March, because we've lightened the restrictions for the program to be able to allow employers to hire even more foreign workers. For example, in the Maritimes, there are a lot of Canadians who are out of work. Thank you.
A few points. So labor market information, as we've noted earlier, is essential to our analysis. But at the end of the day, labor market analysis is not going to guarantee that an individual shows up willing to work in the right place at the right company at the right time. We will be heavily reliant on the recruitment efforts, and as noted, we've augmented our efforts to verify recruitment efforts. And as also noted, we're working with these heavy users. A number of the sectors have been already referenced here today, working with them to strengthen their recruitment and retention strategies for Canadian workers. And then the residual, after due diligence has been shown on individual recruitment and sector-based strategies, the residual demand for TFWs is what the program is here to deal with.
Well, obviously that doesn't work because you have to lower the benchmark, as we have seen in the last March.
We've seen about a 45% reduction in the program and about a 75% reduction in low-wage workers since 2013. So there's been a significant diminution of demand in the program. So we take some comfort in that we're not seeing a trend in the other direction.
Okay. That's correct.
We have 2 minutes left.
I will give it for the next round.
Okay, can I jump in here on another question that's just come? In the Auditor General's report, it says that there are close to 2,000 temporary foreign workers who are on unemployment insurance. Is that correct? We've talked a little bit about that, or is that only in the fishery?
No, that's not just the fisheries sector. I don't have that number in front of me. Could verify, but we do track. We do have data available on the number of temporary foreign workers and foreign nationals.
So I'm just wondering. The Deputy Minister did state when we talked about that they have to be able to collect EI, and I think we understand that. We don't want to bring people from another country here and then a downturn or something happens and here they are, with no job or no opportunities. But are there cases, and do you analyze this? Are there other cases where it may not necessarily be a downturn, but it may be some employees wanting to come back to work? So if there have been Canadians, for example, laid off and now being filled by temporary foreign workers, and now after a period of time Canadians want to come back into the job and they let temporary foreign, are there cases like that? And would that be an abuse?
That's one of the reasons we impose a time limit on the temporary foreign worker. The labor market impact assessment for a low-wage worker is generally 1 year in duration, so that if the business circumstances changed dramatically and there were unemployed Canadians in that space, the temporary foreign worker or the employer would need to reapply, and then we would look at such information as the previous record of employment. The deputy noted we use employment insurance data as part of our review of applications, looking back to see if that employer in the recent past has laid off Canadians. So that's taken.
So it is analyzed.
It is part of the process to look at the next cycle of applications for an employer, and we've committed to looking back. We had a limited window that we looked back at in response to the Auditor General's recommendation. We've lengthened that window up to 12 months of previous.
All right, Mr. Ferguson.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just want to make sure that people are clear on why we identified this. And for us, we felt it was something that the department needed to look at in case it indicated that their original decision that there was a job that needed to be filled and therefore a temporary foreign worker needed to be brought in, whether that original decision was the right decision in the first place or not, right? Because if you bring in a temporary foreign worker and then you have to lay off that temporary foreign worker, does that actually indicate that there was not a job there sort of in the first place or a job that was going to last? So that's the issue that we're trying to get at is, when there is that indication that the job was not going to last as long as it was originally intended, then is there something to learn from that in terms of how decisions are made in approving the temporary foreign worker positions in the first place?
All right, thank you. We'll now go back to Ms. Mendez and Mr. Airy on a split.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First of all, I'm sorry, I don't think we've mentioned this before, but thank you all for being here. It's good that we are able to dig a little more into this subject. I think one of the problems that we are facing right now with the program is that for many years now we've stopped offering a path to permanent residency through the foreign workers program. I don't want to call, because, okay, let's start back. A foreign worker who comes here to fill a temporary work shortage in whatever industry, under whatever reasons, may not necessarily have any intention of living here permanently, but yes, they come and I think in agriculture more than any other sector, that's what we find. They come here for the summer, for the period where they are needed, but they do want to go back to their own home countries once the season is over. But in other circumstances, they probably come to Canada, do or fulfill the contract that they were hired to do, but have every reason to believe that they could make a life for themselves here and contribute to Canada, like so many of us have done in the past. And I think that's another issue with this program, is that we are not providing a path to permanent residency or citizenship. Now, I know it doesn't touch your department. It's not something to do with your department. This would be much more with the IRCC. But perhaps Mr. Willer, through Mr. Ferguson, could tell us if in all the contacts you had with the department, if this was an issue with the employers and with the employees through the analysis that you made of the program.
Mr. Chair, that wasn't something that we specifically looked at, and we didn't, and we say in the audit that we didn't deal with the IRCC side of this. Mm-hmm. But I think, though, it is similar to, one of the things that the temporary foreign worker program, I think, has to deal with is a number of issues that arise in other areas seem to sort of coalesce in the temporary foreign worker program. And what I mean by that are things like, we see the situation with employment insurance, right? So fish plants saying that workers ask to be laid off, and that whole retention problem. So, when that happens, that there's something not happening in the EI program to make sure that, okay, there are jobs available, why are those people, still not working? So there's something going on in the EI program, and when the EI program doesn't deal with that issue, the issue lands in the temporary foreign worker. I think you can say the same thing for the underrepresented groups. If those underrepresented groups are not being well prepared to join the labor force, then again, there's something that lands again with the temporary foreign worker program. I think, the whole question about whether the temporary foreign worker program is being used for family reunification, right? Again, and that's probably closer to your question, right? If there are, people that are trying to get family members into the country, and if this is the way that they do it, then again, it's a problem that lands in the temporary foreign worker program. So I think there are a number of those types of peripheral problems, significant problems that are happening in other programs, and they all tend to coalesce, or a lot of them tend to coalesce in the temporary foreign worker program, and it needs to then figure out how to deal with it.
Would this be an appropriate subject for another audit? Would this be something that would warrant a more in-depth audit of the program?
Well, I think I think again, as this whole conversation does indicate, this is a very complex issue, right? The need for workers to, or the need for employers to have people to do the jobs. The need to give Canadians the first right to jobs, but there still seems to be the problems with lining those two things up. I'll have to think about what else we can do on it. But I think there are additional sort of fundamental issues behind this program that perhaps we haven't yet gotten to.
Thank you very much. Come back, Mr. Area, after we come here, and then we'll get the full 5 minutes. Ms. Rempel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just picking up on some of my colleagues' questions and in your comments, Mr. Ferguson, I couldn't agree with you more. A lot of the topics that I think exacerbate problems within the TFW program are difficult political questions, like why people elect to go on EI rather than go to work at a seafood processing plant. It's not an easy question to be asked, but it's one that we have to address, as well as, if there's backlogs and other economic immigration streams that are preventing people from coming to Canada. While I have a moment just to pontificate, Mr. Chair, I personally think that the low-skilled TFW program shouldn't exist. Nonetheless, on to data to prove my case. I'm just wondering to the departmental officials if there's been any data that has been undertaken, or any work that has been undertaken to understand what wage people who are on EI in Atlantic Canada that might be affected by TFWs coming into work in seafood processing plants, at what wage they would actually go and work at that plant. Has there been any analysis in terms of the wage that would be acceptable to do that work for people who are on unemployment insurance?
The way the wage requirements work in the program is we look at the prevailing wage in the seafood processing sector.
Okay, so that's the wage that would be paid to a TFW or whatnot, right?
And a Canadian. So we look at the wages paid across the sector, including Canadians and
But you're not
TFWs.
Looking at, there hasn't been any analysis to be done at what wage somebody would go off EI and actually work at the plant. Is that correct?
The
point that I'm trying to make is that the TFW program is a market intervention by government that depresses wages. I mean, the Auditor General findings go to this point, right? We've seen this in Alberta. I'm an Albertan. I've seen this problem. I've had Tim Hortons store owners in my office yelling at me saying that we shouldn't have made the changes to the program. And yet I still have this position. So I'm wondering if your department has actually done any analysis or has any economists working for you that are looking at not what the prevailing wage is, but what the actual wage would be that would get somebody off of EI and go to work in a certain sector.
Doing that kind of wage analysis is rather complicated. You need to figure out what would the wage otherwise have been in the absence of temporary foreign workers, essentially.
Right.
So it's a counterfactual proposition that's difficult to analyze.
Well, I didn't ask if it was difficult. I'm just asking if it's been done.
There are some efforts underway. There's some discussions with academics on the possibility of doing it. There's no silver bullet to looking at it. I would say,
And
though,
so
that
what sort of discussions have been undertaken to do that work?
we're looking at the available wage data and what are the trends and what are the impacts on wages of temporary foreign workers. As we say, our policy is that they have to pay at or above the prevailing wage. And we do know that temporary foreign workers represent about 0.5% of the labor
But
force.
specifically,
So
I'm
the
asking,
impact.
so you're saying that there is work that's being undertaken by your department to work with economists, academic, whatnot, in the seafood processing industry specifically?
No, generally across the
Okay.
economy, because there's far more, there's TFWs.
Okay.
There are a number of sectors where TFWs are.
Do you think it's
particularly active.
possible to actually offer, to issue LMIAs? And maybe this is a question for Mr. Ferguson based on your audit. Is there a missing policy piece? Like, are we actually able, under the rules right now, to issue LMIAs in the absence of that type of data?
Well, I think the only thing that I can say is, again, when we do an audit, we look at what the department says that they need to do, right? And they need to understand things like what's the labor market situation. So we look to see what type of information that they have on that. We look at the things like they say, okay, they need to assess the efforts that the employers went through before they hired. So we go through the files to see whether they have done that. We don't try and recommend what the policy should be. What we do is simply say, did they do what the policy already requires?
Quite. Thank you. So just right now, on the record, Mr. Thompson, for our report, when you're evaluating, your department is evaluating whether or not to issue an LMIA, you're basically looking at unemployment rates and whether or not an employer has advertised sufficiently. Would that be sort of an accurate characterization of the review that's done?
They have to have demonstrated efforts to recruit. There's a time requirement for the period, and they have to have, as the deputy noted, document what Canadians have applied and the reasons they were not.
But in terms of a policy instrument, your department, through our legislative framework, is not required to undertake any sort of broader macro or microeconomic analysis on if the prevailing wage is depressed by the presence of TFWs, what the actual wage would be in the absence of TFWs, as well as any other factors such as working conditions, whether or not that's depressing wages, and or the broader macroeconomic impacts.
We are required to do a study, and it's a program evaluation, and as the deputy noted, one is planned for 2018.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. We'll now move to Mr. Christofferson, please.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Page 7, 5.38 of the auditor's report. Department policy required that for low-wage positions, employers should demonstrate that they had tried to recruit from underrepresented groups. In the files we reviewed, excuse me, where this requirement applied, 65% of employers did not make adequate efforts to appeal to underrepresented groups. Nevertheless, the department approved most of these applications. For example, program officers approved applications for temporary foreign workers in some fish and seafood processing plants located near First Nations communities, even when efforts to recruit from those communities were not found on file. So 65% didn't make the effort. In many cases, a First Nation community was nearby, and yet your department still granted the applications. Please explain.
We indeed need to do more on recruitment of underrepresented groups, and we've done a number of things in this area. We've now required not one underrepresented group, but two underrepresented groups to be recruited. We're bolstering the requirements of the employers to demonstrate that requirement. We're supporting it with program investments. I mentioned outreach to the Indigenous service providers that we've got in these regions to align training programs. As the Auditor General noted, if there's a skills deficit or other preparedness to work, we can invest in those populations to make them better suited for the job. So there's a number of efforts in that regard. We've also bolstered our job bank so that, for example, an Indigenous job seeker can identify now on our job bank as an Indigenous job seeker, and an employer would have immediate line of sight to an applicant from one of those groups. So there are a number of areas where we've accepted the recommendations and have further measures in place.
If the Auditor General hadn't come out with this report, it seems to me you wouldn't have done anything. And it seems to me also that 65% should have been saying to somebody in management that we got a problem here. So please, I understand what you're doing to correct it. I get that, and you acknowledged it was a problem. But help me understand, how'd you get to this problem? How could it get to be 65% were not following one of the basic requirements, and yet until the Auditor General did his report, you were just merrily going along?
There are employers sometimes face challenges in how to access these underrepresented groups. It's not immediately apparent what the best recruitment strategies are, so we've been reaching out to make that easier, put the tools in the hands of the employers to do that kind of outreach.
Sorry, my question was more internally. How did it get to be this point? And if the Auditor General hadn't given us the report, I have to believe you'd still be merrily going along with this kind of 65% and still getting an approval. I wonder how that got to be.
Well, we've had continued efforts for a number of years to strengthen recruitment. We've made major investments in Indigenous training and in persons with disabilities, working with provinces. We've increased by over 20%.
When did you start all that?
Over the last 2 years, we've been doing investments with provinces, a 20% increase in our training programs through transfers to provinces, and quite an active investment in skills development for underrepresented groups, including significant new efforts on the Indigenous training side as well. So there's quite a bit of activity and investment underway on that front.
I would expect that, given the importance of this relationship to all of us, that you're going to see more on this probably in our report. If I can, Chair, I'm sure I don't have much time. I just want to pick up on where Madame Mendez was. I am totally confused about this on-site inspection too, and I appreciated her stepping forward, because it's just confusing. On the one hand, you say you got to study it, and that's not supposed to happen until the end of next year. In your introductions, the deputy in her introduction said that, you know, it's obvious, and then at one point you said, well, there's things we have to analyze before we can go there, but now you're telling us you're getting results because you're going there. I'm confused. Help me understand where you were on on-site inspections, where you are now, and where you want to be. Thanks, Chair.
I think the difference is between on-site inspections and unannounced on-site inspections, so we're considerably far into our ramping up of on-site inspections. The unannounced are what the deputy was referring to. We're figuring out the best ways to do that to make sure our employees' interests are dealt with, as well as the interests of the businesses whom we're visiting, and my colleague can elaborate on that.
Thank you. Was there any more on that or no?
Basically, yes, we started last year with the on-site inspection, which were announced. So to ensure that, so we talk to the employers, we make an appointment within the next few days, and then we go on-site, visit, look at the working conditions, look at wages. And in the case of the unannounced, as my colleague mentioned, these increase some of the risks to the employer, to the employees, and to the workers as well, in terms of potential reprisal from the employers. So we want to ensure that we're doing it correctly. There are other departments who are doing it. We're going to leverage their practices, and in terms of exploring the options and making the analysis to decide.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Area, please. Thank you for your patience.
Regarding the unannounced on-site inspections, I'm glad that you're still evolving on that. My concern is that this should not be used as a draconian tool by government employees on small businesses like small restaurants showing up unannounced. And continuing on what my colleagues have earlier talked about, especially Mr. Christopherson, on the underrepresented groups. You mentioned 4 groups: Indigenous people, vulnerable youth, persons with disabilities, and newcomers. What is your definition of newcomers here?
There are different groups we would work with that we mentioned earlier. The group with refugees and asylum seekers, so that's one particular area of focus. But generally, we look at newcomers as people arrived in Canada within the last 5 years.
Okay, you did mention in the job bank there's an opportunity for indigenous people to identify themselves so that it helps employers to recruit. Is that provision available for newcomers too?
We are in the process of building these abilities to self-identify. I'd have to get back to you on whether it exists for newcomers. It's certainly our intention. We're rolling out groups
Fine,
individually.
absolutely. Thank you. And recommendation 5.58, I know this is on AG's recommendation that should ensure officers have access to relevant employment insurance data and sufficient record of employment data for use in their assessment. It appears that you have not clearly committed following the Auditor General's recommendation, but you're merely stating its importance.
We have taken steps already to increase the look-back period for looking at an employer's pattern of use of employment insurance. So previously, I believe we looked back 3 months, and now we're looking back 12 months to get a whole year of information on whether any employees in that work site had been laid
My
off.
question is that do officers have to look into this?
It's part of the assessment process of an application to look at the record of employment of that employer.
No, okay, thanks.
When an application is received, that's part of the process.
Glad, thank you. And coming back to, when the Deputy Minister was there, I was asking her on the negative impact on Canadian wages by this program, and she said Auditor General feels there may be negative impact on Canadian wages, whereas she said that the program should not be putting downward pressure on Canadian wages. We have massive amount of data over a long period of time. Has it been analyzed to find if this is the case?
As I was alluding to earlier, there's rather complex economic analysis to look at a counterfactual proposition. If the temporary foreign worker wasn't there, what would the wage have been? As I mentioned, we are working with academics on that question, and we've also committed to do the best possible analysis in our upcoming program evaluation.
I'm quite surprised that it is being done now, though this program has been in existence for a very, very long time. And another thing which I asked the Deputy Minister we did not have time to cover was that striking a balance, between helping employers fill the labor market gaps and ensuring Canadians have first access. The Deputy Minister said that this balance is important, but it's quite difficult to achieve. And she also mentioned there are national, regional, and industry-specific considerations.
Mm-hmm.
What are those specific considerations when it comes to industries like fish or the restaurants industry?
Right. So sectors have a diverse set of challenges around recruitment and retention of workers. There may be unemployed people in the vicinity of the employer, but perhaps they don't have the right skills. Perhaps they're not living in the same locations. There are issues of mobility, of retention, of skills and training. So those are some of the complexities that vary from employer to employer. Some are in small, remote communities where there are significant demographic challenges, and those recruitment challenges are particularly acute. So that's why, rather than trying a one-size-fits-all, we're doing a review of each of these individual industry sectors to get a better sense of the dynamic and maximize their potential to recruit every Canadian possible, so that the TFW program is there to deal with residual demand.
Thank you very much, Mr. Area. For the final section of questions today, we'll go back to Mr. Deltel, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and c'est always a pleasure to talk to you. So, comme c'est notre dernier tour de piste.
Since it's our last round of questions, I want to talk about the most important topic, which is, are we doing all the necessary efforts to make sure that this program is the last possible resort? And in the OAG's reports, it says that 40% of cases where there was a follow-up done with employers, the OAG concluded that not enough questions were asked. In the same report, it says that the OAG examined more than 500 ROEs, and noted that more than 80% of employees that were laid off over 3 years. At the same time, we hired TFWs, and the report has now been extended to include 21 components when employers do not respect the criteria of the program. And so my question, in conclusion, and I think it'll give you the opportunity to kind of sum up the situation, what are you going to do to be more rigorous and to make sure that unemployed Canadians can have a job before we hire TFWs? Yes, the use of TFWs does allow us to improve recruitment methods. It's not only the case to increase our efforts with regard to training of labor. We're going to work with the sectors to increase skills. At the same time, it allows us to increase the enforcement of the program with regard to the measures you've mentioned, with inspections.
Inspections and other elements of the program to make sure that employers are following the rules when there has been a positive labor market impact assessment given.
En terminant, j'aimerais vous remercier, vous féliciter pour votre bilinguisme.
I'd like to thank you for your bilingualism.
I think that's all the questions that we have here today. We welcome Ms. Hebert, although there was no questions directly to her. She's brand new in that department, about 10 days as an assistant deputy minister. And to Mr. Thompson, my understanding is that you are going to be leaving this department, and congratulations on being named Associate Deputy Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development as of November 20th. And so thank you for your service here and for the answers to the questions. There have been a lot of questions asked in which you are going to get back to us, I believe. I would just encourage you to do that fairly soon. We are doing a study and we're writing a report on this. So the information, the questions that were asked, any other, as I stated earlier, any other questions where maybe you felt you should have answered a different, or you have extra information that you didn't bring forward, please include that so we can include that in the study as well. So thank you for your being here today. Thank you, committee. We wish Ms. Mendez well. She's going to be gone for the next few weeks as she's doing important work in Bangladesh. And so we wish you the best there. We are. Happy birthday to us both. Oh, thank you. We are adjourned.